Well, it's finally happened. The Nintendo Switch 2 has been announced, and that means it is time now for the rampant speculation to begin. What are the specs going to be? How big is the screen actually? Is it an OLED? And I don't have any of those answers. But what I do have answers for is the fact that one of the things that Nintendo released in the recent trailer to announce the Switch 2 is backwards compatibility. What's going on, everybody? I'm Jay. Welcome to Square Pegs. Now, they mentioned that it's going to be both digital and physical, most. So I think we're not going to get anything like the Labo stuff. Maybe 1-2 switch, things that make heavy use of the IR camera. I think those are probably going to be out. But I do think the vast majority of the library is going to be available, is going to be functional, and is going to work perfectly. Now, as someone who collects heavily for the Nintendo Switch with over 200 games in my collection, I went through my shelves and I pulled out a bunch that I think are necessary for folks to own. These are ones that you're going to want in your Switch collection to have for when the Switch 2 launches. And we're starting off with one of the single greatest Mario adventures of all time, Super Mario Odyssey. Now, for a lot of folks, their signature 3D Mario game is Mario 64 or Mario Galaxy, and for me, it's this one right here. Before this, it was Sunshine, but I loved Super Mario Odyssey. I thought it was one of the most brilliantly designed games I've ever played. It was easy to pick up and enjoy. It was easy to understand. It was easy to get into, but it was a difficult game to master. There was a lot of tricks and a lot of things that you had to figure out on the fly. I just thought that was brilliant. It is a marvelous game. It is just signature Miyamoto design, and something that is a picture-perfect example of what the Switch was capable of, and it makes me excited for what the Switch 2 is going to do. I hope we get a brand new 3D Mario at launch. I think that would be incredible, but for now, if you're looking for a great 3D Mario adventure to have on the Switch 2 when it launches, you could do a lot worse than Mario Odyssey. Next up, going with an independent game and a fantastic example of what special physical editions there are out there. This one is actually pretty easy to possess. I got this one at GameStop of all places for a really good price. And it's a fantastic example of what both multiplayer and single-player gaming can be. Because single-player, this game is fantastic, but multiplayer is where Broforce really sings. But this physical edition is great. You get the cardboard slipcase, but you also get a digital soundtrack for the game, you get a comic book, and you get the physical release of the title as well on card. It is absolutely fantastic. It is over-the-top ridiculous and wonderful, and one of my favorite games on the Switch. It was actually something I originally played on Steam, but this was one that I remember when the Switch launched, I said, Broforce needs to be on the Switch, and I'm so happy it's there because this deluxe edition of the game is spectacular. Well worth tracking down, well worth picking up if you've never played it. Now, it wouldn't be a Nintendo console without great games from Sega on it, at least since 1999, right? And one of the best Sonic games ever made, you can find it in a 2-pack, you can find it standalone, is Sonic Mania. Now, this one's great because you also get Team Sonic Racing with it, but Sonic Mania is one of the best love letters to classic Sonic the Hedgehog 2D adventures that I have ever played. It looks and feels like a classic Sonic game just updated for modern times, and this started off as a fan project from what I understand, which is pretty incredible. The gameplay itself is spectacular, the sound is great, the look is wonderful. It's literally one of the best Sonic adventures I've ever experienced. It's one of my favorite games for any Sonic generation. Like, this is just tip-top to me. It is absolutely amazing and well worth tracking down. I found this for next to nothing. I got this at a Best Buy, and it was like 10 bucks or something like that. It's a little bit more pricey than that now, but just such a phenomenal game and such a fantastic thing to add to a collection. All right, going with this one because I do love a lot of the collections that we have received on the Nintendo Switch. And now any of the collections from Capcom are great. Any of the Mega Man collections are fantastic. But my favorite, the one that has been like just the absolute best for me, is the Marvel vs. Capcom Arcade Classics Collection. This gets you 7 games. It gets you Punisher, X-Men Children of the Atom, X-Men vs. Street Fighter, Marvel vs. Street Fighter, Marvel vs. Capcom, Marvel Capcom 2, and Marvel Superheroes. It's a great collection, and it's an example of what Capcom was able to do with these incredible fighting games back in the 90s. They are absolutely fantastic, arcade perfect ports, and just such a wonderful collection to have. There's something really cool about playing Marvel vs. Capcom 2 on the go, on the OLED. It just looks incredible. And being able to play it with something like this fixture grip allows you to use the Switch Pro controller on the go. It's absolutely magnificent. One of the best games on the Switch, one of my favorite collections of all time, and I'm a sucker for collections, so that is high praise coming from me. This is one of my favorites. All right, something that I think you're going to be good with really any of the entries from the series on the Nintendo Switch, but for me, I think you have to go back to the original just so you can have an understanding of where the game came from and where the series came from, and that is Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. This is such a marvelous JRPG and such a wonderful example of what Monolith Software is able to do when they're left to their own devices and have the ability to tell an epic and just genre-expanding story like this. This is almost JRPG perfection as far as I'm concerned. There are some things that take getting used to. Some of the action sequences are a little bit different than what you might be used to as far as a JRPG goes. There's a little bit more interaction that you need to do. It's not turn-based by any stretch of the imagination, but it is such a wonderful series and tells such a beautiful, marvelous story that it's so worth picking up and so worth getting into. Any of the Xenoblade games are great, but I think you start with Xenoblade Chronicles, the first one. One of my absolute favorite collections, and not really a collection of multiple games, it's just a collection of one game. This gets all the DLC on one cartridge. This is Dead Cells Return to Castlevania. This is such a ridiculously wonderful game. So Dead Cells is one of the best Souls-like ever. I think that's kind of a general consensus amongst people, is it's just a phenomenal game. It is tricky, it's difficult, and it is an absolutely just incredible game to experience. It's fun, it's tongue-in-cheek, it's challenging, and it has so many just hidden Easter eggs and love letters to classic independent games, as well as Castlevania, that I can't help but enjoy it. It is a truly remarkable title, and something that a lot of people have played digitally on multiple different consoles, but for me, it being on the Switch and this physical edition with the Return to Castlevania stuff is just magnificent. Okay, back to Nintendo now, and one of my favorite Nintendo games and one of my favorite Nintendo series is Fire Emblem Three Houses. This is from the deluxe edition. Don't think you need to get that one, because that is trading for a ridiculous price right now, but it is just a lovely turn-based strategy game, and if you're into turn-based strategy games, it should be on your list no matter what, because the game is so good. It is telling the story of the three houses of a particular school, and you get to control any particular house you want, and you're able to recruit members to your house from other houses. And the storyline is fantastic. The characters are memorable and wonderful. It's just, I think it's a perfect Fire Emblem game, because while it does have a challenge, it's not overly esoteric or overly ridiculous to get into like some other Fire Emblem games that I've played in the past. It just works. It's fun. It's great. And the voice acting is magnificent. It's really just the total package for me. It's a spectacular title, and a lot of the DLC that was released for it is marvelous. Now, I've gone on the record in the past as saying I'm not the hugest fan of this series, just because I think it's a great idea that isn't necessarily executed perfectly well, but it took being on the Switch for me to really get into it, and that is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. This is such an incredible collection. It comes with every bit of DLC. It's got some really good feelies in the box as well. And it's just a great game. Like, it's something that, for some reason, I needed it portably for me to give it the time. I was able to lay in bed and play it, just, you know, while my wife was watching a movie or something like that. I could play as Geralt of Riva and go through this amazing game. It's something that, it comes in waves for me with this title. Like, it's something where I will pay a lot of attention to it, and then I'll put it down for a year and a half and never touch it again, and then come back to it months later. But it's something where every time I do play it on the Switch, I am really impressed with what CD Projekt Red was able to accomplish with this game being on the Switch, because this is something that was designed for the PS4 and the Xbox One, and it runs really well on the Switch. Now, it is ugly, don't get me wrong. It is not pretty like those versions are, but all the gameplay is there. All the elements that make the game great are there. And if you have ever been on the fence about it and you're looking for an epic RPG to have on your system, you can't go wrong with this one. It's absolutely marvelous. There have been an incredible amount of unbelievable independent games released, and one of the strongest supporters of the Nintendo Switch has been Devolver Digital. And one of my favorite games that they have ever done is Pepper Grinder. When I first saw Pepper Grinder, I was convinced this was just going to be a love letter to something like Drill Dozer, which was a lightning in a bottle type game. And this is so far from what Drill Dozer was, and it was beyond anything I had expected or anticipated, and I am legitimately blown away by the quality of this game. It does share the similarity that there is a drill involved, but that's where the similarities end. You use your drill for pathing, which is kind of similar to what happened in Drill Dozer, but there's such a tremendous physics engine in play in this game that it takes everything that you would do with a drill and turns you almost into a rocket, because you're launching yourself through the ground and launching yourself up into higher places. You're able to drop your drill bit and pick up things like Gatling guns. It is a remarkable, wonderful, phenomenal game that I was just legitimately blown away by when I initially played it, and I'm so excited to have it physically, and it's such a marvelous title. Something like this wouldn't have been made a few generations ago. It's an amazing game, and just an absolutely miraculous title, and just a perfect example of what Devolver means to Nintendo. Now, what Nintendo means to Nintendo is to make fantastic games, and there's been no shortage of entries in this series that are phenomenal. You could go with the 3D adventures from Metroid Prime, but for me, it's going to be Metroid Dread. One of the most challenging Metroidvanias I've ever played. It's an unforgiving game that is frequently frustrating. There's actually been points where I have put it down and not wanted to pick it back up, but there's just something about it where I'm just drawn back to it like a siren song, and it's something that I absolutely adore now. It's hard, don't get me wrong, and it's almost hard for the sake of being hard at times, so instead of being something that's more accessible, but the game itself is magnificent, the look is wonderful, there's some really, really great level designs. It's classic Metroid action while still kind of doing its own thing by adding in the different robots that are chasing you down that you have to avoid. It takes some chances and it takes some risks on things, and it just nails it. It sticks the landing every single time. There have been no shortage of amazing platformers on the Nintendo Switch, and one of my all-time favorites, one that I absolutely love, that I think is a love letter to Donkey Kong Country and to Super Mario World and things like that, is Kaze and the Wild Masks. This is something that if you had told me was a lost piece of code from the 16-bit generation, I'd have believed you, because it plays like a classic 16-bit game. It takes all kinds of cues from Super Mario World, all kinds of cues from Donkey Kong Country, and it just revels in the fact that it is a love letter. It's a magnificent game. I love the look of it. The soundtrack is great. The gameplay is wonderful. It doesn't do anything really crazy out of the ordinary that you would expect from a platformer like this, but what it does is it plays great, and it looks great, and it's super fun, and really that's all you can ask for.
Folks that have been on the channel for a while know I am not a huge Atari fanboy. I'm not an Atari apologist. I didn't grow up on the 2600. It is where I first played video games, but it is not the system that captured my imagination. But there's something to be said for the history of Atari, and specifically what they mean to the video game industry and how much influence they have had. And where I really see just an incredible game is the Atari 50th Anniversary Collection. And this is the updated Steelbook that gives you not only the original, just like chock full of games and just incredible behind the scenes featurettes and fantastic just case studies into the history of Atari. This also gives you new stuff. It adds 38 more games onto something that was already jam-packed with gameplay options, and 2 additional timelines. And the timelines in this game are things where you're able to go through and look at design documents and watch interviews and learn about the games and learn about the company and the people that made the games. It is a remarkable collection. It is something where I played this and I realized just exactly how important Digital Eclipse was to modern gaming, for their just absolute adoration of classic gaming and just the pure reverence they have for what came before. They are incredible. It is such a wonderful collection, and I suggest everyone get it, even if you're not an Atari fan, because you're going to learn something, and that's pretty important and pretty remarkable when it comes to video games. My personal favorite RPG on the console is one from a series that I had kind of given up on. I hadn't played anything from this series in a long time, and it really reignited my adoration for it, and I've gone back and played a lot of games that I had skipped out on. That's Dragon Quest XI's Echoes of an Elusive Age. If you have never played a Dragon Quest game, they can be heavy to get into. And there's a lot of history that comes before, and there's a lot of just kind of classic gameplay elements and design elements in store for you that can be a little off-putting for people that are new to gaming. But this does something really remarkable because it takes all of those kind of classic tropes of Dragon Quest, but it makes it accessible and it makes it enjoyable and it makes it incredibly fun. And one of the strongest things that they do is that they cue you on what came before. So if you put the game down for a little while, your loading screens will tell you exactly what the story beats were that were happening before you got back into gameplay. It's something I wish more RPGs did, because there's a lot of times where I've put a game down and I've come back to it a few months later and been like, I don't know where the hell I am. I don't have that problem with Dragon Quest XI's. Not only does it do all this stuff great, the gameplay is incredible. It is top tier, one of the singular greatest RPGs I have ever played, one of my favorite games of all time. Everyone knows the Nintendo Switch is no stranger to ports, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because for something that does port a lot of Wii U games, I don't have any issue with that, because the Wii U sold like 8 copies, so that doesn't really bother me. And okay, like 13 million, but when you consider the fact that the Nintendo Switch has now sold over 144 million units, and you compare that to the 13 million units that the Wii U sold, you're looking at just an exponential increase and an exponential exposure for software that was developed for the Wii U that just didn't have the return on investment. So when companies see the Switch as an opportunity to kind of regurgitate that code base and use it again, to make something exciting and excellent and wonderful, and you get something like the Nintendo Switch edition of Lego City Undercover, that makes me happy, because Lego City Undercover is simply put one of the single greatest video games ever. And yes, I say that without hyperbole. I do think this is legitimately one of the best open world games of all time. It is GTA with Legos. It is magnificent. The storylines are great. The world is vast. There's so much exploring you can do. There's so many things to unlock and discover and find out. The game is just singularly excellent. There is nothing in it that misses. I can see why some people would not be drawn to it because it is a Lego game, and sometimes that can be a little bit off-putting, but for me, something like that is just remarkable, and it's such a wonderful title and such an easy game to fall into and enjoy that I can't help but suggest it to people. It's something where when it got released, I think I bought it launch day because I was so excited about it. It's just a magnificent game. There's been no shortage of Pokemon games released on the Nintendo Switch, and there's been no shortage of disappointing Pokemon games released on the Nintendo Switch either, which is an unfortunate situation because I do think that there's really an audience out there for something great from the Pokemon Company and from Game Freak. And unfortunately, we haven't really gotten that with Sword and Shield or Scarlet and Violet. But where we did get an excellent Pokemon game and something that is absolutely remarkable is Pokemon Legends Arceus. Taking some risks is not something you often hear from Pokemon. It is a very safe system to be a part of, a very safe franchise to be a part of. So for them to take a chance and to send you back in time and to do something different with the Pokemon franchise is pretty incredible. The gameplay is wonderful. It switches things up just a little bit, but it keeps things familiar so you're not going to be lost when you're playing. It's really, really something kind of amazing. And it's not unfun. Like, it's the best looking Pokemon game I've ever seen. It's one of the best playing Pokemon games I've ever played. It's really just an excellent title. And if it's something where you've been on the fence about Pokemon games and you're not really into the mainline games right now, or you want to skip those mainline games, Legends Arceus is the way to go. Early on in the Switch's life cycle, we started getting hints that there was a bit more of a friendly nature between Nintendo and Microsoft than I think any of us really expected. When It's an Xbox became a thing, and the team at Microsoft started releasing software elsewhere, it was curious to see them starting to come to Nintendo and realizing that there's an opportunity to expand not only their IP ranges, but also make good with other companies. So when something like New Super Lucky's Tale, which debuted on the Xbox, released on the Nintendo Switch, I was blown away by it because here was an example of what could happen. Like, this doesn't happen in entertainment, right? You don't get those crossovers. Very rarely does something like that happen. You get something like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which saw Disney and Warner Brothers characters come together. You get something like the recent WWE and TNA partnership where you see those wrestling companies get together, or like when Brooklyn Nine-Nine and the New Girl crossed over. It's something where it's like, huh, that's weird. So to see Nintendo and Microsoft get together and start putting stuff out together is really incredible. And New Super Lucky's Tale is just a singularly excellent 3D platformer. It takes classic 3D platformer tropes, but it doesn't rely completely heavily on them. It uses them, but it does it in its own way. And the game is just incredibly charming and ridiculously fun and so brilliantly well designed. It was one of the first games I actually reviewed on the channel with my wife Meredith, and it's something where I go back to it pretty frequently just because of how much fun it is and how great of a character Lucky is. Some folks might be wondering where this one is, so we're just going to get out of the way right now. Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, not a game for everybody. I know a lot of folks are kind of disappointed by the Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom series, and I understand why. It's a lot of game. It's a lot of overwhelming game, and it's something where I remember when I finally beat Breath of the Wild, I was like, I never need to play that again. And I actually ended up going back to it a couple of years later because I started to kind of get that itch again to play it. And I booted it up and I was just like, nope, I'm still done with the story. But if you haven't played it, it must be played and it must be owned and it must be something in your collection because it is a singularly remarkable Zelda experience. It is completely different than anything you've ever played from Zelda. Breath of the Wild is remarkable. If you play it and you don't like it, I get it. But for me, it's a pretty incredible game, and I have no regrets playing it as long as I did and beating it. It's a must own, I think, for any Switch collector, and it's something where I hope we start getting downloads when we get to the new Switch 2 that are going to improve things on it, because there's some performance issues in the game that I think would be greatly improved by a stronger system, and I think that would be amazing for like an upgrade kit like we see with Horizon Zero Dawn on the PS4 to the PS5. That would be really cool to receive. One game that I think is a must-own, and something that I do not necessarily think a lot of people pay attention to on the Nintendo Switch, which is a shame because this game is unbelievably good, is Slay the Spire. Now, I'm a big fan of deck builders, and I'm a big fan of roguelikes, and that is both two great tastes that taste great together right there, because that's what you get. It is a truly interesting title where you are buying cards and collecting cards and building your deck and going through this just kind of creepy, almost like Souls-like experience where everything's a little dark, everything's a little disturbing, and you're going through and defeating the enemies. And as you go through, you're going to unlock different characters, you're going to find different abilities to use, be able to build your deck the way you want. And it's just an excellent title. It's legitimately one of the best games I've ever played. It's probably my favorite deck builder I've ever played, and it's so well executed. Now, if you're looking for something that's going to give you mods and things like that, I'd suggest the PC version, but you're not going to find that physically. The physical one on the Switch is fantastic, though. Waited a long time for this game, over a year for it to finally release. And it's something where I think it's nice to see Nintendo acknowledge this series, because they've kind of abandoned it in favor of Fire Emblem, and that's a shame, because Advance Wars is one of my favorite franchises, and Advance Wars 1 and 2 Reboot Camp is something that really shows not only what Way Forward is capable of, who did the port on this game, and it shows something that's really remarkable with what Nintendo is able to do with a turn-based strategy game. It's just different enough from Fire Emblem that it offers a unique gameplay experience. Obviously, it's modern and not medieval, which is really nice, and it's definitely not fantasy-focused, it's more science fiction-focused. The characters are memorable, the designs are really good, the gameplay is spectacular, the music is wonderful, and I love that this game does everything in an update. It's not just a few aspects of the title that are updated, everything is. Even the multiplayer stuff, even the different maps that you're able to download, everything is wonderful. It's just a spectacular series and just a wonderful collection. I think that the Nintendo Switch is one of the strongest beat-em-up consoles ever made, and the best beat-em-up on the console is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge. This was my game of the year a couple of years ago, and it's something where I was absolutely blown away by the game the first time I played it, and if that was all I got, that would have been enough. But they've continued to produce DLC, and it's simple DLC that is just enough of a plus to make me go, God, that's really creative. That's a great idea. It's something where I am able to look at it and go, I want to keep playing this. I want to do this again because there's new characters or new color schemes or just simple, basic gameplay elements added that make the game more interesting and more intriguing and just add replay value. And so often with DLC, that isn't the case. It's just glut for glut's sake. But this one does it right. It is such a wonderful title. I love .emu anyway, and they do some incredible work, and this is one of their best games ever made. Them and Tribute just made magic. They really did. Lots of arcade ports on the Nintendo Switch. There's some incredible digital options with the Arcade Archives or ACA Neo Geo Classics, but my favorite personal arcade port on the Switch is Cruis'n Blast. It is so much fun. Raw Thrills just crushed it. So, like, if you have ever played a cruising game, this is the perfect cruising game for you because the game is magnificent. It's fast, it's funky, it's ridiculous, it's over the top, it's absolutely bombastic, just explosions everywhere and dinosaurs and alien invasions. And you just need to go from point A to point B. You got to drift, go up on the sides, collect the coins, collect all the different things in the game, find the unlockables. It's magnificent. Legitimately one of the most fun experiences I've ever had. It's a game you can play for 5 minutes or 5 hours and never regret it. Now, I'm a sucker for a steelbook, and that might be why this one is on the list, but it also happens to be one of the greatest RPGs of all time, and just an example of what Atlas is able to do when Atlas is allowed to create something magical, which they always are. I mean, let's face it, Sega knows what they got with Atlas, and that is Persona 5 Royal. This is the one that I think we all wanted for a long time, right? We were all asking for Persona 5 Royal to come to the Switch, but we never thought it would actually happen because there was always rumors of it's a PS4 exclusive, it's a PlayStation exclusive, it's staying there. And instead, we got this incredible physical release of Persona 5 Royal, where you get to play as the Phantom Thieves, you get to control Joker and all the different characters of the Phantom Thieves, and it's just, it's perfect. It's like legitimately one of the greatest games of all time. It is an excellent role-playing game. It does remarkable work with fantastic gameplay elements. The look of the game is spectacular. one of the single greatest soundtracks ever recorded. It's picture perfect. HD 2D is thanks to the Nintendo Switch as well, where we get stuff like the Octopath Traveler games, which I also love. But the one I really want to point out right now is the most recent HD 2D release that came out, and that is Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake. This is the second Dragon Quest game on the list, for one, but it is such a wonderful game, and it's so fun to get into these classic Dragon Quest games with a significant amount of quality of life improvements, not only visually, but also just like simple menu system improvements, basic gameplay improvements. Everything is in place here. We've had multiple Dragon Quest releases on the Nintendo Switch, whether it's the Dragon Quest Builders games. There was the original 3 Dragon Quest games that released that had just kind of the graphical upgrade, and this plays so much better than those games did. This is a spectacular game. We're actually getting 1 and 2 with an HD 2D remake sometime this year, I believe. Looking forward to that as well, but this one is spectacular. Nintendo first-party games are always fun, and I don't want to say creative, because typically when they find their formula, they kind of stick to their formula, right? Like Mario Kart is Mario Kart. You should get that one too. I have it digitally because it's an evergreen game. I know I was never going to trade it in, but you should get Mario Kart 8. But there is something really remarkable about Nintendo with the Luigi's Mansion series, because it is so far out of the norm for what Nintendo does. And Luigi's Mansion 3 is a fantastic entry in the Luigi's Mansion series. It continues the story of Luigi and Professor Egad and the Poltergust and all that stuff, and Polter Puppy and stuff like that. It's a wonderful game. It is challenging, but it's kind of sneakily challenging, because it's not something where it's like the gameplay is difficult. It's the exploration can be tricky, and finding all the different secrets and making sure you find everything in a particular stage can be a little bit tricky. And that's really where the challenge comes in. Now, there are some tricky boss fights and things like that, but the exploration is really where the game just absolutely crushes it. And the look of the game is magnificent as well. Like, it takes risks, but not like aggressive risks. Like, it's the safest risk taking you'll ever see from a Nintendo game, but it's just a remarkable title and just a wonderful experience to play. Another port that I suggest for everyone to have on the Nintendo Switch is one of the greatest games from now this is the 3rd generation it has appeared on, and that is Rayman Legends Definitive Edition. I love Rayman. A wonderful character. One of my favorite characters in video games. Just a great design, great look, great gameplay. And Rayman Legends is the best Rayman game we've ever received. And to get the Definitive Edition on the Switch that has all the DLC, all the different characters, every stage available for you to play is amazing. It is a classic 2D platformer, and it feels like classic Ubisoft, which I really appreciate, because it doesn't rely on kind of plussing the experience like Ubisoft tends to do with live service games. It's just a great platformer on the go. And that's all you really need. It is a classic experience, a classic look, a classic game, and one of my favorites. Fantastic game here, and something I never thought I would see remade, because it seemed to be the series that Nintendo just didn't care about, because every time we got a new release on it, it felt like a new format, and that is Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door. We received this originally on the GameCube. It's one of my favorite entries on the GameCube, and it is one of my favorite entries on the Nintendo Switch. The remarkable thing about the original 2 Paper Mario games was it really improved upon what Super Mario RPG did when it initially released. By taking risk and by taking a chance on the different gameplay options, by putting timing elements in play, it's stuff we ended up seeing kind of carried over to the Mario and Luigi games. It is a really excellent title with some phenomenally hilarious writing that is just a really signature Nintendo experience. Like, when you play this, if you didn't know this was a Nintendo game, if you didn't know this was developed by Nintendo, you would play it and you would look at it and go, yep, that's a Nintendo game. Because the gameplay is just a little bit weird enough, because the work is just a little bit weird enough that it feels like signature Nintendo, and it is an absolutely spectacular game. I love this one. I'm so happy we got a remake of it, because it was something that deserved to be brought forward and deserved to be plussed up and just look incredible. Magnificent game. All right, another collection, and our second entry from the Ninja Turtles on this list is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Cowabunga Collection from Konami. The remarkable thing about this is that it is just a collection of games. A collection of classic Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games. You get all the Game Boy games, both of the NES games, you get the Super Nintendo games, you get Hyperstone Heist on the Genesis, you get the original arcade release, you get the Turtles in Time arcade release. It is magnificent. All of them play incredibly well. All of them have quality of life improvements that are optional that you can turn on if you so choose, which make the games more enjoyable. It is a brilliant collection and just an example of classic Konami gameplay. It is it's a perfect collection. It really is. It was one of my favorite games of the year when it released. And it's something that I look at and I go, man, one of the things the Switch does incredibly well are just collections, massive collections of fantastic games, and that's one of my favorites. Here's another port I never saw coming onto the Switch. This is a port of a classic Game Boy Advance game brought forward onto the Switch to be made just beautiful and just fantastic, and that is Mario vs. Donkey Kong. I am a fan of the original. It's one of my favorite Game Boy Advance games, and this one here on the Switch is a great improvement. The gameplay is identical to what you had on the original Game Boy Advance, but the look and the visual improvements are significant. The game is just silky smooth now. It is beautiful to look at. The sound is wonderful. The gameplay just holds up. It's a great puzzle platformer that is signature Nintendo. It really is. Back to Ubisoft now, and one of Ubisoft's best games is not something from a Games as a Service entry. It isn't an Assassin's Creed game or anything like that. It is inspired, however, by Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and that is Immortals Fenyx Rising. I really thought this was going to take off. I thought this was going to be a huge hit of a game, and it's really a shame that it wasn't, because it's an example of what Ubisoft is able to do with that Assassin's Creed engine when the handcuffs are off, when they aren't tied to having to create copious amounts of DLC or just a ton of things that need to tie into a live service game. It just works. It's a fun game. It's silly. It's over the top. It's a great example of what Ubisoft can do. And it's a shame to see Ubisoft in such dire straits right now, because it's just such a, it's games like this that I look at and I wish we got more of. It took a long time for me to get into Kirby. I have never really been a huge Kirby fan. The Dreamland games are great, but the one that really sings to me, the one that really speaks to me and something I've truly enjoyed is Kirby and the Forgotten Land. A truly excellent 3D Kirby adventure that does a lot of risky things with a character. It's not a safe game by any stretch of the imagination for that IP. It takes chances, it takes risks, it does things that have never been done before. Like, who would have thought Kirby could inhale a vending machine and then spit cans at people? Who thought he could become a car? It is a weird game. There's a little bit of body horror going on as well too with it, but the game itself is fantastic. Like, the look of the game is unbelievable. The soundtrack is wonderful. The gameplay is ridiculously solid, and it's one of the strongest 3D platformers on the Switch. And it took a lot for me to really be excited about it, because again, it's Kirby. I was never really a huge Kirby fan, but the appreciation I have for this game has taken me back to other Kirby games and really got me into the series. It's in fact, if you're interested in seeing what my thoughts are on ranking every Kirby game, link's on screen right now. Another collection from Capcom, and again, none of the Mega Man ones, because I think you guys are tired of me talking about Mega Man on the channel. Well, you should buy all the Mega Man collections. This is the Capcom Fighting Collection. This is such a cool collection. It gets you a ton of amazing games. So you get Darkstalkers, Night Warriors, Vampire Hunter, Vampire Savior 2, Street Fighter 2, Red Earth, Gem Fighter, Cyberbots, and Super Puzzle Fighter 2. It's just a great collection. It's the first time we've ever gotten Red Earth ported to any console here in the States. First time we've ever gotten a home release for it. The gameplay holds up. It looks great. It plays great. We're actually getting a second one, which I can't wait for. That'll be out sometime this year. But if you are a fighting game fan, this one needs to be in your collection. You can go with either of the releases for this game that are on the Switch, but for me, you got to go with Bayonetta 2, because not only do you get Bayonetta 2, you also get a download code for Bayonetta 1. The Bayonetta games are fantastic. They are just ridiculous and just silly and over the top, just gratuitously violent and just fantastic. It is kind of remarkable that Nintendo publishes them in the grand scheme of things, now that I'm thinking about it, but the character of Bayonetta is fantastic. The storylines are great. They are very easy games to fall into because they're not overly complex with controls or anything like that. You just kind of just beat the crap out of everything on screen and go. It is a wonderful game and just a ton of fun. And like I said, this one gets you Bayonetta 1 and Bayonetta 2 on one package. Can't go wrong with that. All right, back to Ubisoft. And this one is one that I got earlier this year, and I was intrigued by it because I have always liked the 2D Prince of Persia games, even though I've never been good at any of the 2D Prince of Persia games, but this one included. But one of the cool things about this one is Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown doesn't just rely on classic Prince of Persia tropes or Prince of Persia gameplay. It becomes a Metroidvania. You are going all over this castle and finding different aspects to unlock and different abilities, and it's just remarkable. It really is. The look of the game is great. The soundtrack is wonderful. The gameplay is challenging and fun and fast. And it's really, again, kind of like what we saw with Immortals Phoenix Rising and kind of like what we saw with Rayman, when it is something where Ubisoft is allowed to take chances and do something different, you make a great game. There's so often that Ubisoft gets trapped by things like live services, like with a lot of the Assassin's Creed games or with Watch Dogs, where it just, the wheels fall off and it doesn't become a fun game. But stuff like this is amazing. Everyone needs this game in their collection because this is the best version of the game ever released. And until we get the next one, I'm sure, on the Switch 2, and that is Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Look, it's classic fighting action, a classic Nintendo gameplay, tons of characters to unlock. It's just wonderful. Just buy it, play it, enjoy it, love it. My game of the year, the first time I ever did a game of the year countdown, is one of my singular favorite games ever, all time, any console ever, and that's Hades. It is Supergiant at their absolute best, one of my favorite independent developers, a company that just does nothing wrong. Every game that Supergiant has produced, I have loved. It stars Zagreus, the son of Hades. You are going through the different levels of hell to get out to find your mother, Persephone. It's just amazing. There's a ton of different unlockables, a ton of different ways to play it. It's a roguelike, so there's always a new challenge and always a different way to go through it. It's beautiful. It's fantastic. I can't wait for the sequel to release on the Switch. It's just excellence personified. All right, my favorite collection on the Nintendo Switch, and something I think anyone that is a fan of RPGs needs, is the Final Fantasy Pixel Remasters. Because not only do you get just the first 6 Final Fantasy games, all of which are great, all of which everyone should play at least once in their lives, it's the remasters, so they look fantastic with significant quality of life improvements. It's still grindy. It still takes a while to get through them, but there's so many improvements made in these games that is just easier to play, I guess is the best way to put it, where you don't feel bogged down at all times by having to go through things. You're able to speed up fights. You're able to have it auto battle. It is remarkable. And I mean, it gets Final Fantasy VI, which is my favorite Final Fantasy game of all time. And being able to have that on modern audiences for a modern console is wonderful. We started with a Mario game. We're closing with a Super Mario Brothers game. And it is not a 3D Mario game this time. It is a 2D Mario game, and something that I think is really remarkable. And it is something that kind of shows a change of form for Nintendo, because for so long we've had Charles Martinet as the voice of Mario, and now we've moved on from Charles, and that is first voiced here in Super Mario Bros. Wonder. I'm a huge fan of this game. It is one of the best 2D Mario games I've ever played. I don't think it's the best. I think there's certain ones that are better, but there are things that this game does that are really remarkable, and it's just incredible. It's really fun. It takes some chances. It takes some risks. It does things that we've never seen with Mario before, and I think that's pretty cool. The gameplay is varied and fun. The power-ups are enjoyable. The look of the game is wonderful. It's colorful. It's bright. It's beautiful. It's classic Mario. There you have it. 37 must-own physical Switch games for folks that are excited about the Nintendo Switch 2, or for folks that are just wanting to keep the Nintendo Switch 1. These are games that I think everyone should own. They are fantastic titles that just offer a wide variety of incredible gameplay, and I think you would not be disappointed to have them in your collection. But I want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments down below, what Switch games do you think are must-owns for folks that are excited about the Nintendo Switch 2? Which physical games are must-own, must-keep games in a collection? If you're interested in more videos like this, I've got a link on screen right now showing other physical hidden gems that you should pick up on the Nintendo Switch. Until next time, I've been Jay. Appreciate you spending a little bit of time with me. Please click like, please subscribe if you're new here. And until next time, remember to play more games, stay square, and take care. I'll talk to you soon.